welcome everyone to the panel roundtable discussion. I've probably called it every word because I wasn't sure what to call it. I'm Michael Cox, and I'm the coordinator for the Constance M Carroll Humanities Institute. And to start us off, our Vice President of Instruction, Isabel O'Connor, has agreed to do a little bit of a welcome.
Thank you, Michael, and good afternoon. Buenas tardes, everyone. I am still living in the beautiful picture of Balboa Park, so just leave me there and I'll be okay. Just wanted, by the way, this is my home, the Humanities. I'm a historian just like Michael. I really like this idea that you have brought to us, Michael, whatever you call it, panel discussion. It is a really great idea to highlight what the humanities do for us. You know, that old Latin word, humanitas, what does it mean to be human in all its diverse aspects and complexities? And certainly your speakers reflect the diversity of the human experience and how we enrich it. Oftentimes we think of the humanities as living in their own little separate bubble or box or the ivory tower. And we know that is not necessarily the case. The humanities are with us on the street, living within society. And more than ever during COVID, they proved to be wonderful allies and contributed greatly to enriching and making that human experience through those traumatic times much better. I know I connected with museums from across the world and connected with a lot of humanities events, even through Zoom. So chapeau to the humanities for really adjusting to the circumstances and contributing to society. But before I say the end of this, I want to say something else that I think this panel does really well. It also shows us at the college level, and particularly our students, that the humanities do have a place and a future. And that future can translate in amazing jobs that also fulfill, careers that are fulfilled with joy. Not only do you contribute to society, but I would, certainly like to work at all the places listed here. So there is a future for the humanities now more than ever. And thank you for bringing this to Mesa College and to all our panelists. And thank you, Michael, for allowing me to just say hello. Thanks.
Thank you, VP O'Connor. And I want to take a chance to thank everyone on the Humanities Institute Advisory Committee, because they helped me reach out to several of our panelists today. So I appreciate that. And before we do anything else, and I should premise a few things. First, if you are an attendee to the panel and you want to ask a question or make a comment, use the chat function. The panelists have the freedom to turn themselves on and off whenever they want, the way I've set it up. The other thing is, the idea behind this is, I'll just do a very brief introduction, and then Leticia, who's one of our panelists, has agreed to moderate and kind of keep the discussion moving. We do have some sort of guidepost issues to talk about, but overall, it's really going to be whatever the panelists want to talk about in relation to their particular institution that they're talking about today. I always start, certainly my classes and meetings and things like that, with a land acknowledgement. And this is just one I put together. There are certainly better ones out there, but it is important for us here at Mesa, and then I know we have some attendees from other parts of our district as well, to acknowledge our campuses are part of the traditional lands of the Kumeyaay. And for many centuries, the Kumeyaay have belonged to this land and lived in balance with this part of the world, which is now San Diego. These are the unceded homelands of the Kumeyaay. It's important we recognize their continuing presence and also the colonial legacy that's brought us all here, where we are right now in this room. All right. We thought it might be a good idea to just talk briefly about what are the humanities, because as Dr. O'Connor mentioned, The term gets used a lot, but sometimes students don't know exactly what that terminology means. And the term humanities includes, but is not limited to, the study and interpretation of the following: language, linguistics, literature, history, jurisprudence, philosophy, archaeology. This is all from the National Foundation of Arts and Humanities Act. The bolded part I bolded because it seems particularly relevant to what we're talking about today: the study and application of the humanities to the human environment, with particular attention to reflecting on our diverse heritage, traditions, and history, and to the relevance of the humanities to the current conditions of national life. It seems appropriate, I think. I should also mention the namesake of our institute here at Mesa, which is Dr. Constance M Carroll. And I just have a little brief biographical material here on Dr. Carroll. You may or may not know Dr. Carroll. She retired last year at the end of last academic year after serving as chancellor for our district for 17 years, has been very active as a proponent for the humanities in many ways, including her service on the National Council of the Humanities as appointed by President Obama. All right, and what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to mention the participants in chronological order, or alphabetical order, chronological, and ask them to introduce themselves. Christina, if you would.
Hello, everyone. My name is Christina Godinez. I am the Corporate and Community Liaison at Minge International Museum, and I focus on community and corporate relations here. Nice to meet you all.
Okay, Leticia, please.
Hello, everyone. My name is Leticia Gomez Franco. I am the Executive Director of the Balboa Art Conservation Center here in Balboa Park.
Okay, thank you. Imwat.
Hello, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Hello, everybody. My name is Imoa Luna. I'm the current board treasurer at the Centro Cultural de la Raza. And I'm also part of the Arts Advisory Committee that helps with the programming and culture events of the space. Thank you.
Thank you. Brandy.
Halito Chokma, Sanno Fat, Brandy McDonald, Chicasa Saya, Chata Saya. Hi, I'm Brandy McDonald. I'm a citizen of the Chickasaw Nation with ancestral ties to the Choctaw Nation. I'm the Senior Director of Decolonizing Initiatives at the Museum of Us.
Thank you. And Jesse, last but not least.
Hello, my name is Jesse Perez. I'm the Program Director of the Old Globe University of San Diego Shiley Graduate Theater Program. And just like it says in the title, I work for the Old Globe as artistic staff and senior staff. And I'm the Craig Knoll Distinguished Professor over at the University of San Diego and teach acting and movement.
Okay, thank you. And I'm going to turn it over to Leticia now and have you guys just speak on.
Thank you very much. And I will get us started with just noting that we are obviously in the very best of company. These are some very important institutions in Balboa Park that are definitely taking lead in addressing how we engage communities, how we engage diverse communities, and how we kind of make use of the last 2 years of kind of pause and chaos and respite to really think about how we can shift the way that organizations are really taking into consideration the way communities engage with our materials, with our conversations and our narratives, and how we can shift our programming to better encapsulate what stories we should be telling and how we should be telling them. So we have a fantastic roster here of panelists with some really great questions to get some great conversation going and learn more about how these institutions are engaging. So we'll begin. First, I'll be asking some questions and then we'll go through all of our panelists so that you each have an opportunity to tell us about how your particular institution is working with engagement. So our first question is, what role do you see your institution playing in delivering the humanities to the diverse communities of San Diego? And we'll start with you, Iman.
I didn't want to start. I I guess Centro is a very, very special place within Balboa Park. I think when I think of Centro, I think it's a very accessible space, literally for every single person that comes through the Centro doors. And what I see this institution being in the future is that it represents community, and it will continue to be run by community members. But these community members will be from all broad cross-section of organizers, skills, and trades. And it's an institution that will not move to serving very special interests or exclusive donors. I think the true origins of the Centro has long been to continue to be a multidisciplinary arts and culture community space, and then continue to embody the humanities in a multifaceted way through the traditional Mexican muralism art form, screen printing, photography, and the continued programming that we currently have. I think the Centro, when the founders refer to us, I feel like when I think of humanities, I think about this code of the founders when they made their statement, and it's a pursuit of human truth and Chicano beauty. So when I think of humanities at Centro, I think about that code, about being authentic to ourselves and being reclaiming our space and not asking permission for that to reclaim that space, making it happen. And whatever form it comes. And I think that's something that we have been trying to do at the Centro, in serving people in their own historical context to find themselves in their own indigeneity, and to learn about our Chicano, Mexicano, Latino, or indigenous arts and culture, and connect with community members that are producing and regenerating cultura and continue to build community. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you so much, Imot. And I actually probably should have asked before, for those of us in attendance who may not be familiar with the Centro and its history and its founding in Balboa Park and beyond, if you could give us a little bit of background. You actually gave us a little bit of background in your answer, but if there's anything, any kind of context that you would like to add to that.
Yeah, I think right now we're going to Centro, we're ending the cycle of 50 years of the existence of the cultural space. And it's been a space of struggle and resistance. And I say that because it was not always welcome within the context of Balboa Park. It was something that was reclaimed and was fought. And that's something that continues to still be true to this day. And we'll continue to elaborate more because it's a community space that's completely 100% volunteer run. So what makes different community members invest their time to run this space that continue to represent their culture, but also their continued resistance and being present within that space and the heart of San Diego.
Thank you for that. That was beautiful. We'll move on to Brandy, and maybe you could tell us a little bit of history on the Museum of Us, and then what role do you see your institution playing in delivering the humanities to the diverse communities of San Diego?
I wasn't sure if you were going to call on me next, but I was like, maybe, but you cannot make eye contact at this point, right? So the Museum of Us, it was formerly the Museum of Man. It is one of, I believe, 4 of the historic buildings within Balboa Park. And so it was built in 1915. It's been around for ages, well over 100 years. It was birthed from the colonial endeavor. So it is a historic site. When you go to the museum, you will see the facade that has 9 colonizers etched into the skin of the museum, all the way from the tip top, all the way down to flanking the doors. Our museum is a cultural anthropology museum. We changed our name from the Museum of Man to the Museum of Us. I believe it was in 2020. It was in the summer of 2020. And so we've still continued to be a cultural anthropology museum, and focusing on what that is. What does that look like in terms of our place within the community? And so when I think about this question, I think we've really set in a space that we are not delivering anything, that we are really a platform in order for communities to have their stories to be told from their perspective, not necessarily from a researcher's perspective or a curator's perspective, but in partnership with the museum, how can we be a platform in order for their stories to be told from their perspective and with their consent, and have their cultural resources being cared for in the way that they want them to, or to be returned. And so that's where I really see like our museum, and I know that there are some questions in terms of how that has changed, because we have not always been that. Anthropologists have not always held on to that ethos, but that's really where we sit now, in terms of what does it look like to be all of us, and what is all of us not really meant in the past, and does it mean now, and what should it mean for us moving forward, and what do we need to change in order for it to actually be authentic and be all of the communities of San Diego, and the diverse communities, and all of that diversity, and what does that look like? Yeah, so I think that's, maybe I'll stop there, because that's a big answer, but I think it kind of, cultural anthropology is big.
That was great. Thank you, Brandy. We'll move on to Jesse. Maybe you could give us a little bit of background on the Old Globe, and then respond to the question of what role do you see the Old Globe playing in delivering the humanities to the diverse communities of San Diego?
Excellent. Well, thank you for having me. First of all, it's an honor being here with all of you. And, you know, my arm at the Old Globe is basically the professional training program. So, which started in 1987, it's over 36 years old. I know that the Old Globe is over 80 years old and has been a huge institution there in Balboa Park. I joined the institution in 2019. So I'm a little over 3 years old here, coming from New York. And I was brought here to bring diversity to the program, to be quite honest, and bring change. And wow, what a time to come in to change stuff. Especially not anticipating the pandemic, but then bringing in a Mexican-American, Chicano, to lead a program from an actor's point of view, which, believe it or not, is rare in acting programs. They usually get directors, dramaturgs, academics, you know, so it becomes a different sort of idea when you haven't actually done the acting part. So I just want to bring that forward in the trust that they've given to an actor to actually run an MFA training program. What that also means is that I have the full responsibility of bringing 7 new artists to San Diego proper from a national and international level. And especially now that we have Zoom and video and iPhones, everybody's a movie maker, but also all of theater making has moved to be digital. And so what starts happening is access. Right? We start bringing in people that usually can't travel to New York, Chicago, San Francisco, some of these major cities, because they can't afford it. Right? So this all of a sudden opens up a whole new playing field on the type of artists that we can bring to San Diego, and the types of stories that can be told now by bringing these artists, right? Because a lot of times, like, the big excuse, or sorry, the reason for people saying, oh, we can't do that play, is that because they say we don't have that color. Or that many people of that certain ethnic group or culture or background. So I want to bring those people here and have that reason go away, you know, because the truth is everybody's story is important. And I know that in America, we fight for our story. So I think the theater has been whitewashed since its inception. And now it is changing, not only because of the type of leaders that they're allowing to take charge, but because there's been a big uprising since the pandemic, a big social justice change. And so with that coming along, there's just a big action plan behind all these institutions that really, really are forging forward the idea that, yeah, we've been making mistakes in the past, and we can use certain words now to start big, crucial conversations about what's been missing to actually be a cultural center. Because the truth is, I don't know how we call ourselves that when we exclude certain cultures and not allow certain stories to go through. Now, I know that there's only certain amounts of theaters and programming that can happen from year to year, but I'm glad that there is now a huge change of the different voices that are coming forward. And also, what is the word classical mean? You know, it's a big reinvestigation, because to be quite honest, our program was started to support the Shakespeare Summer Festival and train actors in a classical format so that they can have young actors to supplement the ensemble and the supporting roles of the Shakespeare plays. Now, should we centralize Shakespeare? I think he's an amazing and brilliant writer, but so are other writers. So I think it's time that we start focusing on the big spectrum of the stories that can be told from other different cultures, and we start learning from them, because I think that's what the humanities is, right? The interpretation of language and the interpretation of classical text. That's what we teach at the University of San Diego, and that's what our training program is about. It's been around since 1987, and since the last 4 years, we've been bringing really diverse groups of BIPOC artists to San Diego, and I hope they stick around because San Diego is awesome, and it's so close to Mexico that I just feel like there's so much diversity to be celebrated here. So let's not build barriers. Let's open up doors.
Definitely feeling that energy. Thank you for that, Jesse. And now we'll move on to Christina. If you could tell us a little bit about the history of the Minge, recent awesome news, and tell us a little bit about how the Minge is playing a role in delivering the humanities to the diverse communities of San Diego.
Yeah, much like what Brandy was saying, offering a platform to the community and how that looks like, I'll explain in a minute. But humanities is at the core of Minge's vision, as it's focused on furthering the understanding of art of the people from eras and cultures from around the world. So Minge has always been hyper-focused on the humanities. And this isn't just done through exhibitions and workshops, right? We work through collaborations, and this has changed a lot over the years. So Minge started in the 70s, and we moved to Balboa Park in the late 90s, and it was a smaller scale museum, smaller than what it is now. And there was more exhibition going on than there were programming in comparison to now. The spacing capacity, it was not as possible as it is now. And so with our renovation, I know quite a few people know that we were closed for a major renovation in 2018 all the way into 2021. And so when our senior leadership looked into how we can, enhance on the connection of people and collaboration, a lot of that was focused on the building and just the structure and how it was designed. So the design and the intention meant to be here for the communities. And so going back to that, where Minge isn't just focused on the exhibitions and the art, it's also focused on workshops, on working with arts and culture organizations and sharing their stories, not through our lens, not through what we expect or we think what other cultures want to share, but really bringing in other arts and culture organizations to speak on their culture and to just give them back the spaces that belong to them. I think that Minge has done such an incredible job at returning the spaces and not taking credit as an institution, but offering full credit to every single institution doing the incredible work. And here in the museum, we're bringing in intergenerational groups of people. So we have toddlers, we have toddler programming that's educating children on arts and culture. Kids programs, we have an amazing program, Community Mondays, where we offer our theater space at no charge for these cultural institutions to share their stories. And in addition to that, we have outside of the museum, we're connecting with people, we're connecting with our stories and our history, our cultures through programs such as our Lifelong Makers, which is a program for isolated seniors, or Family Sunday in Sherman Heights. So we're connecting not just as a museum here in Balboa Park, but we're sharing and we're connecting and we're just exchanging stories with one another outside as well. So humanities, just every part of what Minge is.
Thank you very much for that, Christina. I think there's an obvious collective shift happening that a lot of the institutions in the park have been taking part of. And I'll take a moment to talk a little bit about my organization, the Balboa Art Conservation Center. I'm the executive director there. And just a little bit of its history. It was founded in the 70s as well. And it was actually founded in the 70s as part of a regional movement, national movement to create regional conservation labs. We are an art conservation and cultural preservation nonprofit organization. And in the 70s, a lot of museums realized that they needed conservation services and didn't necessarily want to invest the resources to set up an entire lab in each one of these spaces. So conservation is a perfect kind of shared resource identity that you can engage in. So different museums got together and built kind of collective conservation labs. So BACC was born in the 70s through efforts from the San Diego Museum of Art and the Timken, who both needed conservation services. And then other museums came on board, and other museums could also make use of the conservation services. So we became our own nonprofit. And then we've been at Balboa Park since 1975, and in our own spaces since 1982 in Casa de Balboa. But really, historically, BACC has limited itself to being just a service organization, right? Providing technical service, providing training for art conservation. But when you engage in such a direct kind of line of service, it's easy to kind of bubble yourself and feel that you are not connected to the larger audience. So if we limit our service to just serving institution to institution, we forget that the end user, the public, should also be involved in the process of conservation. So some of the big kind of evolving in the recent years has really been an atonement, like a lot of your institutions, and kind of realizing what role we have played in being an exclusive organization, right? Here we are all making very deliberate attempts to be more inclusive and accessible, and to think of your field, in the example of art conservation, to be intentionally exclusive is a hard pill to swallow, but one that we have been tackling over the past couple of years, not only as BACC, but as a field, a national field, in how we can begin to engage a larger audience, and how we can begin to engage and understand that behind the objects that conservators treat and work on are our peoples, our narratives, our stories and histories, and that the responsibility and the luxury of cultural preservation is one that belongs to everybody. So this is the space that BACC is in right now, is really thinking about taking our grasp off of art conservation as belonging only to an elite few, and the art conservation, cultural preservation only belonging to those who have the resources to pay for it, and really thinking about how not only do communities suffer when they don't have access to resources and knowledges and are able to contribute to those knowledges, but the field also suffers tremendously when we lack the diversity and we lack the inclusion. So this kind of moment of atonement that we are going through will allow us to open the doors to have a two-way stream and growth within the field and outside of the field, so that all communities have access to conservation and preservation. And while we're still our little kind of office spaces on the second floor in Balboa Park, our intention really is to expand so much further than that. And it is inspiring for me to hear of all of the work that you are doing, and knowing that we've followed in your lead, the Old Globe and the Museum of Us and the Minge and for 50 years of the Centro, in kind of becoming this more accessible institution. So thank you for all of your great answers there, and for giving us a little bit of insight and history into your institutions. So we'll move on to our next question, and we'll go around and call on you to respond to this. How has your institution changed and or evolved in recent years? What new initiatives do you have, and why? And some of you addressed these in your last answer, but we'll start with you, Brandy, at the Museum of Us.
So I'm going to say maybe recent in museum years, because museum years don't really, we have a tendency to move slow. We're mountains, and think about it in the context of maybe a decade. And so within the last, prior to about 10 years ago, it was very much a traditional museum, very much a traditional anthropology museum, very focused on physical anthropology and all of the various anthropologies. About 10 years ago, there started to be a shift and a change to start moving towards equity, a change to start looking at the white supremacy that is systemically embedded within museums, within our museum, and just the field of museums as well, and looking at the ways in which that is connected to colonialism. It started small and slowly inching forward. And so over the last 10 years, it has really created a paradigm shift within our museum. And so now our pillars of our work is really looking at what does equity mean within our organization? What does decolonizing practices look like within our organization? What does a paradigm shift from the colonial to the decolonial, or at least aspiring decolonial, look like? And what does it look like for us to start practicing and living anti-racism, aside from just having an exhibit that focuses on anti-racism? So what does it mean in terms of our internal and our external, not just an exhibit, but our operating practices? So a lot of our work within that decade, and even I would say within the last all the way up until about 2 years ago, has very much been internal. One of the things that we noticed within our history anyways, and that we've seen within the field, is that many times it's kind of the exterior, the exoskeleton gets fixed, but the inside doesn't get fixed, right? And so you've got this really shiny building that looks like you're doing the work, but that's not sustainable because inside it's rotten. It's got a colonial white supremacy rot. And so we really look to see what that looks like in terms of our policies and our practices, and started intentionally shifting our policies and practices and seeing how that can create a symbiotic relationship, and then moving into our external. And so now that's kind of the space that we're still working on our internal. We're not perfect, but our policies and our practices, from our HR to our marketing to the ways in which we handle cultural resources and honor repatriation and the living entities that are the cultural resources and the ancestors and the communities, is really kind of where we are now. Our name change was a part of that. I think it's a very external visual piece, but it has also been something that people have been asking for since the 70s, y'all. So it is about time that we did it. It wasn't something new. It wasn't because of the push for social justice within society. It is something that people have been pushing for us for a long time. That's the same as anti-racism, fighting white supremacy in the field, and our colonial legacy. The reason I have my position is because Indigenous people for decades have been pushing for us to change and us to not be perpetrating colonial harm. And so I think it's because of all of them that we're here today. And that's really, I think, about what does it look like for us in the future? Because we're trying not to be static. We're trying to be really intentional and transparent about our change, but recognizing that we need to continue to implement change because we're not there yet. I don't know if a museum can decolonize, but I'd like us to keep trying. And I think that that's kind of where we are in terms of hope and in terms of continuing to push ourselves and thinking about the next generation that's going to come in and see things that I can't even see or we can't even see. Yeah, also a big answer. There's more tangible, if folks have questions about tangible examples that I can give later on. But I think in terms of the overall breadth, it's really a paradigm shift that we have been doing, that we're in now, and that we're going to continue to do and committed to do.
Thank you, Brandy. That's inspiring. We'll move on to Jesse. How has your institution changed or evolved in recent years, and what new initiatives do you have and why?
Yeah, I think the programming speaks for itself. You know, we just saw at the Old Globe in the White Theater, they did El Borracho, which is a Mexican-American play by Tony Meneses. They did Trouble in Mind that was playing over at the Globe simultaneously, which is, you know, by a Black playwright. And so it was interesting to have those both plays as their comeback, you know, and it playing in rep and seeing all the diversity backstage. I had the honor of being in El Borracho, and this crossover was so welcoming coming back from this isolated pandemic. Of course, everybody's still wearing masks backstage, and when you look out in the audience, everybody has masks on. But, you know, the programming has changed. I think new work has become very important and become centralized because we are looking for the new classics, thinking about what is a classic. I think they're being written right now. You know, the ones that we haven't celebrated that were written 10, 15, 20 years ago. What's happening, you know? And to go back to the idea of what our program as a training program was to support Shakespeare. Now, how that looks in America is a big question, you know, and I think we have to stop thinking about it as a British art form. I don't think we have to have a British accent to do Shakespeare. Yeah. So it becomes this thing on how we search for American Shakespeare. I think it's not a new concept, but one that I want to continue fighting for, because I think we live in America, and I think that there's a lot to reflect off of that text and that heightened language that our students want to sink their teeth into. And it's so hard when people say, no, that's not a right interpretation, or what it actually means. Right? That's when I start getting a little nervous, because I'm like, wow, did you know the guy himself? Because the truth is we can't speak to that playwright. So we can't really get his ideas, but I think he wrote it for people to interpret. Right? He wrote it for actors. Actors are interpreters. So it becomes this thing on what the Globe wants to produce and how they want to produce it. At our training program, it becomes, what are we teaching and who's teaching it? Yeah. And it's become this thing where the pandemic, as harsh as it was, I think it solidified a lot of people's lives that have been in academia for a long, long time. Yeah, for over 20 years, some for 15, some 10. You know, the training programs have changed over the last year. So if you're still trying to teach what you taught 10 years ago, we have to figure out how to start shifting your summers so that you start getting engaged on how you can learn as an educator to come back and teach the makeup of your class, because it's changing. The students are changing. If I was bringing in the same people that were being brought in here 20, 15, 10 years ago, it'd be hard for me to watch that sort of play, that Shakespeare production. I wouldn't see myself in it. Yeah. And I have come up through white institutions all my life. So I feel like there's a certain knowledge that I've gained on how to navigate, but also how to push. Yeah. Because I feel like there's a reason why we're all in these positions now. People want the change. And I also know that it's hard to keep us in these positions now because a lot of people want our work now. And I think that's so exciting. But it's a testament to Balboa Park and the Cultural Center and the Old Globe that we decide to stay in these institutions because we see hope. Yeah, if I didn't see the change happening at the Old Globe, who has a social justice action plan and is meeting, you know, on a monthly basis to discuss it, has brought together an EDIA committee, is now looking for an EDIA director to be part of the employment staff. So it's becoming this thing where they want to embed the change. They want anti-racism training to go to the board so that people start realizing that it doesn't start just at the people that are working every day. It starts at the people that are the philanthropists that are putting the money forward so that they start seeing that, yeah, I want that programming, even though I have no idea what it's about or what that culture is. Something's happening to me. I'm getting to peek into something I don't know. Isn't that amazing? As opposed to having the same plays being regurgitated or recycled over and over with the same cast, and oh, I'm selling the estate again. I don't, some of those problems I don't understand. I can imagine. And of course, as an interpretive artist, and as we train, we start expanding our imagination on how to substitute or how to make things different so that we can find our way in. What if we didn't have to do that? And those stories actually pertain to us. The Globe is now starting to program that way. And I feel like now at the university level, we are doing it as well. The university has hired an EDIA director. And so as much as we wanted to head out and find a third party to bring in, we have them there at the university, which is so interesting to me, because why has it lacked for so long that now I can just be like, oh, there's an office here that I can go to and I can bring 3 different trainers to my actual program and we can sit down and have real conversations. And as we start unpacking that, those meetings become less and less and the work becomes more important and they know how to find themselves in it. So is there change? Yeah. Is there a lot of holes on how I'm saying retainment is hard? Yes. But am I hopeful that we will get the right foundation to train these new American artists? Because that's where we live. And that's who these people are that we're trying to make the leaders of tomorrow.
Thank you so much for that, Jesse. I love that. We will move on to Christina and tell us a little bit about how the Minge has changed or evolved in recent years, and what new initiatives do you have and why?
Yeah, so I've been with Minge since 2019, but I have been a Minge fan even before. So I'm an emerging museum professional. And seeing the museum change from when I was a visitor even, and then being hired on and seeing the behind the scenes activity makes me feel really proud and impressed, especially as an immigrant, you know, crossing over from Tijuana, not having access to museum and the arts. And then just into college being introduced. But I think I'm very proud about how Minge has changed, not just physically, but ideologically. So of course, and I'm going to mention this throughout the questions, or I'm going to bring it up to how we closed, reopened, and it's just been a great transformation. And so if its physical space, of course, was very limited. We closed for major renovation, and we had to rethink about how we were going to make the best use of the added space. So its physical change allowed for greater audiences to enter the spaces, right? We added another 10,000 square feet. And during this time of, our transformation, we were, of course, the closure for renovation, and major events began to impact not just Minge, but the world, right? So we were in the middle of the pandemic, and there were incredible protests demanding for the justice of the corruption of police force that led to the murder of George Floyd. And a lot of museums were being challenged and asked, well, what are you going to do? What is your job, right? And so with Minge and the Minge leadership, we were in this very unique and just, I want to say blessed position to be able to change, to be able to move things around right while we were closed. And so Minge was challenged to step up and make changes to how it functions, how it will function in comparison to how it used to. And we really focus on radical hospitality to start. Our first floor is free to the public, our restrooms are free to whoever wants to come by. Anybody can sit in the steps and relax, and nobody's going to kick you out. Bring your laptop, bring your phone, whatever it is you need to do. And so it's very different from historical museums, Eurocentric museums, where we're definitely staying away from that. And of course, we do have our IDEA initiatives, our IDEA committees and groups. We have our own BIPOC in-house group where our staff of color, we make decisions and we bring that up to our leadership team. And our leadership team, I'm so proud to say, listens to everything that we're saying, and they take into account what we're expressing. And so there are a lot of beautiful changes going on within, where there's more space for speaking up. There's more space for having our voices heard as staff of color, and myself, feeling as an immigrant, as a Tijuanera coming into the arts. And so that's one of the changes. And then tangible changes, somebody mentioned the tangible, we've changed to having free programs. So museum, everyone 17 and under, it's very challenging for a family of 4, family of 5 to buy passes, not just for themselves, but for the children, right? Not many families can afford it. I know that I couldn't afford it as a youngster. Anybody with SNAP-WIC or EBT as our Museums for All program, having that as part of a change of museum. I know I mentioned the first free floor, free educator memberships to 100 members per year, I believe. We are diversifying our board, and they're incredible members from the community, unrelated to Minge, unrelated to anybody in Balboa Park, members that are active in the community, that are part of our IDEA committee. We're attracting younger audiences through collaboration and programming, representative of the different cultures that we have on exhibit here at the museum. Again, a radical hospitality. We want to make sure that everybody feels welcomed, from the moment you look at the museum to the moment you see our installation that looks like a fence, but it's not a fence, because we don't want to deter people. We don't want to exclude or make people feel uncomfortable. And I feel that personally. I take that personally, just because I grew up in the South Bay, didn't have my documentation. I couldn't enjoy the arts. Fences for me were they were traumatic. And so to see how Minge, even in the intent behind the design, in the changes behind the design, are very powerful, from the tiniest detail to even what we're doing behind house. So another thing to add is that we're expanding our reach into historically underserved or historically excluded communities of color. And I'll be talking about this a lot, just because it's part of what I do as my job as a community liaison, to bring in diverse voices and to have those voices be spoken, to speak to the community, to educate, and to offer representation. A beautiful story, we had a Filipino Pasakat dance academy, and they had their own exhibition outside of our niche space. And there was a Filipino family who came in and they said, oh my God, the parol, right? There's that representation. And so those little changes were years ago, Minge, before we closed down. I don't think that a Filipino family would have come down and say, oh my God, this is a part of who I am, my tradition, my culture, my customs, and it's being recognized. And there's a description, not just in English, but in Tagalog. So it's a lot of those things that have changed, that are little steps to larger things going on behind the scenes at Minge.
Thank you for that, Christina. It's really beautiful to see so many years of advocacy and protests and demands from community really kind of being heard and responded to by some of these larger institutions. At the end of the day, communities want to be seen and they want to see themselves in these institutions, and it's really beautiful. You've all spoken to that so far. So it feels very fruitful as a activist and advocate myself for access and representation to see all the great work that is happening. We'll move on to Imoa to tell us a little bit about how the Centro has changed and or evolved in recent years, and what new initiatives do you have and why?
No, it's been really nice to hear everybody. I'm learning a lot more from also our sister organizations with Balboa Park. I think for Centro, it's been very challenging in many forms. I think there's a lot of internal changes, and it's also, I think it's also with the very meager resources that we have. It also has its advantages that allows a space for experimentation. And when I say that is that when I first came in, I've been knowing the center for the last 18 years, but I've been a volunteer for the last 6 years. So when you don't have a paid staff, it's basically the meaning that you're able to really make something out of nothing. In the sense that, I come also as a community activist, a community organizer. So when I came to the center, I realized, how do we make this space sustainable? And I come from this grassroots organizing of creating autonomy, creating spaces that are not dependent by institutions, by government, and that's my political hat. But how does that intertwine within art institutions or cultural centers? And I think the Centro was a really unique that has continued to sustain itself and survive, even with the meager resources or lack of resources or lack of being able to maintain a paid staff or having the know-how and how to maintain a nonprofit. I think that's also, there's many factors, you can name one or two. But what has provided, it has provided a place for people to come and be able to kind of pitch and say, okay, let's create something and let's form something that has not been done before. And I think that many of us come from different backgrounds. I also worked in nonprofits in the past. And when coming to the Centro, I put my activism hat, and it's like, how do we make this space more, not top down, but more horizontal in our practices? If we have no funding coming in, how do we create free programming? So we really have to really think outside the hat and really have a different approach to this.
We'll give it a couple of seconds, see if she comes back. All right. Well, while she comes back, I'll talk a little bit about BACC and some of the changes and evolving that we've gone over the past couple of years. And it really has been inspired by work happening in the community and activism. And Brenda, you mentioned the work that has to happen internally in an organization before you work on the exoskeleton, and how the real intentional inclusive work has to happen inside before it happens outside. And I think that's the phase that BACC is in right now, after 45 years of functioning really kind of within its safe box, and we've kind of broken open that box. We are paying a lot of attention into how the internal process works and how we become first and foremost an inclusive, intentionally equitable and safe, positive workspace for us inside before we can come outside and be a positive workspace for the outside, right? Because we want to be working inside and outside of community. And Jesse, you mentioned this idea of how we have leaders of color working in institutions right now, and the retention of that. And I held that really close to my heart, because as we think about, as BACC thinks about engaging with other institutions and training the future workforce and bringing in, interns and fellows to train in art conservation and cultural preservation and putting them into institutions, it is really imperative that those institutions are not toxic themselves, right? That we are not kind of sending out our folks into institutions where they will not be supported and where they will not have healthy workplaces to lead in, and that will allow them to lead. So thinking about how we become a strong organization and the future BACC that we want to be, and the diverse BACC that we want to be, an inclusive BACC that we want to be, we want to make sure that we are a positive, safe working space so that when we are at our maximum potential and as beautifully inclusive as we want to be, that is not just a facade, right? It's not just a performative action. We really are building a community within ourselves and outside. So that's some of the evolving that we've done in recent years, kind of just planting seeds right now and building bridges. We've been doing a lot of work with the Centro on our recent Chicano-Chicanx preservation conversations, and those have been going really well. These things are all just the very beginning of us exploring what a different world we could be living in once we walk outside of our boxes. So that's just a little bit about BACC. I'm going to take it back to Imoat so she can finish telling us about the Centro.
Yes, I'm sorry that I want to have a better connection to Centro, and this is what happens. No, I guess I just really two things I just want to touch base is that this experimental aspect of the Centro is that we have a community proposal meetings once a month. We have let the community know, if you want to create or have something at Centro, come propose at the Centro. We have never denied anybody the space to use the Centro. And I think that has really opened this. It's like, okay, I don't have the capacity to be able to run and to create programming constantly. We have to have community create programming for this space. If community really, if they belong to the space and they think that this is their space, then they will do the programming, they will do the work and the labor to make these projects come to fruition. And I think for the last 3 years, we've been holding community meetings on the first Wednesday of the month. And we literally receive maybe 10 to 12 proposals on a monthly basis. And from these proposals, the community members, youth, for the first time, have the space to be able to really put something together that we don't have the capacity to do because we're all volunteers. And that has really opened a door that we have continuously events run on a weekly and monthly basis. And a new approach that we also have done within the different volunteers that we have is that we have allowed different collectives within the community to come and use the space to be able to put these projects into fruition. And one example is that there's a committee collective called Tianguis de la Raza. People might think that it's a Tianguis committee, a market, an artisan market, but it's not just an artisan market to be able to have another extra day for vendors to make money. It's really a cultural space to be able to, the community members run them. They meet on a weekly basis to run this community market, and they do it once a month. Also have this another project called Lutequita Colibri. So all these projects came from community proposals on those monthly meetings. And now they're recurring programming and projects that are happening within the Centro. So this is the different way that we've been navigating, really allowed the programming to happen within the space. And we have to do it, and we have to be very innovative and experimental and being open to everybody that comes in, to willing to try and to create these spaces for themselves and really make these spaces their own. So there's a few projects, you think they're central projects, and they are central projects, but they're really run by community members and the community. So I just wanted to share that those listening is that we have these meetings once a month, and Centro has been made more accessible for community members to make the programming for this space, because it's a cultural space that belongs to everybody, and it's not something for then the Centro, the governing boards, to decide what happens in the space. We allow them allow people to to be able to make this space themselves. So I just wanted to share those two projects, but there's at least 7 different projects run by community collectives that are not board members, that are not part of government committees. These are and volunteers and community members that make these projects within the space. And that's how Centra has, in the last few years, has picked up a lot of activity, even amongst COVID, because we have made a lot of the activities also outdoors. But I just leave it at that, Leticia. Gracias.
Thank you for that so much. That's a whole conference in and of itself right there, as institutions try to figure out how to intentionally engage communities, right? How do you leverage the resources that you have access to as an institution, such as funding and space, to really bring community in, not just to be bodies in your space, but to lead programming and advocate and bring the rest of the community, right? That's really important work. Thank you for that, Imad. We'll move on to our next question now. How has the public responded to your institution and its reimagining of how to convey your message or messages to them, assuming or not assuming that COVID has had an impact on this year, and not just COVID, but the past 2 years and you know, the double global pandemic that we went through, health-wise and racially. So how has the public responded to your institutions and those reimaginings? And we'll start with you, Jesse.
You know, since the programming has shifted and the globe has been doing the work, you know, I just feel like now there's been rocket fuel kind of injected into the system on how the change is coming to the forefront immediately now. Because like we're all saying, right, people are listening, you know, and the senior staff is like, oh, wow, this is broken. And it is a little twisted up inside, but it's interesting once you start saying, okay, well, we're going to try this and let's see how the public takes it, right? Because that's all that matters to theater is the public. And so they did the change and the prices were the same, the sales were the same, everything kept moving in the way forward, and the change didn't disrupt the organization. The change didn't disrupt their you know, what they were thinking and projected that these projects were going to make and how they were going to stay afloat. If we are a non-for-profit, if we need philanthropy, how do we stay afloat, right? If the public isn't going to pay for what they're seeing or aren't going to be into diverse stories, but they are, you know, and it's just about how you balance it all out. It's been so opposite that if we start bringing change in even a little bit, they're like, whoa, well, what about all of this? And how do we leave all of the old programming behind? And what happens to Chekhov and what happens to Shakespeare? I'm like, they're going to be okay. They're going to be okay. You know what I'm saying? Let's just give it a shot. Let's see what happens if we bring, you know, some heightened text from Mexico, something from Africa, you know, something translated that we've never done before. Why don't we create something from a Black playwright that's here in San Diego and they write something on our students? Oh, wait a minute, that's not classical training anymore. But it becomes this thing on how do we engage our students to be passionate about the arts. If they don't see themselves or can't be the interpreters of these classical texts, then what are we teaching them? And so it becomes this thing on the public is just eating it up. I don't know how to put it any other way, because the people want to come. If you go to the plaza outside of the Globe Plaza, it's always a hub. And it's not about, you know, oh, there's theater going on. There's a cafe, there's free Wi-Fi, there's a place to skate, there's a little park right there where the dogs can go free, and there's umbrellas. What happens if you're just cruising through the park, have never seen theater before, and stumble onto this magical plaza, right? And I think Balboa Park attracts people from everywhere, and you just happen to walk over to the ticket office, you know, and you're looking at what's programmed, and you're like, oh, I want to see that. I mean, right now, what they're doing, Ganson and Mala. So I think once again, the spectrum is there. They're doing a show that doesn't even deal with language, but with the physical body moving in space, right? And it's diverse. And sure, it's fussy and it comes with all of that, but the programming all of a sudden becomes more universal in a different way. And if you're going to do Mala and an all Spanish play, now we're really talking, right? Because now the audience is really going to change. Sure, I think you can come and watch the translation, right, on a monitor. But if Spanish speakers start coming to the show, if my mother starts coming to the show and being like, oh my God, they're doing a Spanish speaking play over at the Globe, it changes what's happening at the Culture Center. Because my mom doesn't usually say, oh, what's happening over at the theater, at the, you know, at Center Theater Group, what's going on at the Geffen? That's not my mother, you know. But if my mother comes to see El Borracho because her son is in it, and then she sees the next program is called Mala and written by another Latinx playwright, something's going to happen to my mother, even in her old age of 80s. She's going to want to come to the theater. Right? She's going to remember her days of watching Zoot Suit over at the Los Angeles Theater Center, and how she used to take us as kids because she saw her culture in it. And so I just feel like it's about time. You know, I feel like some of their biggest sellers have been plays from other cultures. And so I think it's time that they celebrate it. Sure, I think we can balance it, right? But I think it's okay to lean a little further this way right now to make it even. And I think the Globe understands that and is in conversation and is, like I said, diversifying their leadership. The people that you're starting to see at the Globe start looking more and more like people that you see outside walking, you know, in Hillcrest. And it becomes a different conversation. So I'm really excited about where it's headed. And I'm excited for the audiences that are going to come see the shows at the Globe now that it's different.
That was great. Thank you so much, Jesse. We'll move on to Christina and the Minge. How has the public responded to your institution and its reimagining of how to convey your message?
I'm along with Jesse, the representation being offered. Like Jesse mentioned, if my mom saw that there was a play that says El Borracho and it's in Spanish and she goes, it's the same thing with Minge. I think that with the reimagining of the museum, physical and the ideological, with the representation being offered, I see more of our cultural communities bringing in their families and their friends and their network. And that's the positive change that I've seen, the positive response that I've seen. There have been very small cases, right? Very rare cases, but there are some part of the public that's like, oh, this is the museum. Oh, it's free. Oh, aren't you afraid that somebody's going to come into the museum if it's free? Anybody can come in. And the majority of the public says, what's the problem? It's about time that museums are open to everybody without making them feel like they're not being represented. And for me, that's a big deal. As an immigrant, as a daughter of an immigrant, it's a huge deal. So I think that the public has responded exactly the way that we've been hoping for them to respond. They've been activating our spaces in ways that we didn't even imagine. They've been coming in and enjoying the spaces. This new vision of it's not just we're going to look at art for 2 hours nonstop, because you do get fatigue. You do get a bit of fatigue when you have your family, your nieces, your nephews, your kids, when you're looking at art, of course. And I think that Minge's, more come as you are. Let's relax and enjoy, and take a seat back at the terraces. I think that change has really welcomed a lot more families. It's welcomed a lot more people into the museum. Like I said, the public is activating the spaces in a beautiful way. I see more people sitting at the steps where the cushions are, and it's amazing. It's positive. I think that it's very evident that museums are changing. It's very evident that Minge itself has changed, and it's beautiful. It's incredible to see that the public is really interested. What's at Minge? What's happening at Minge? Oh, it's free for certain ages. Oh, college students can reserve the library at no cost. Yeah, the public is just using it in a beautiful way. I had written a note here just about how we have different cultural groups using the spaces, and we have a diverse audiences coming in. We have younger audiences coming in. And if we were to look back at Minge or institutions in general 5-6 years ago, that wouldn't have been the case. So just to keep it short, the public has been using our space in such an incredible way, and it's inspiring to me too, and it's encouraging to me coming in and seeing how everybody is taking space, taking back the space. So
I love how you mentioned that the public itself is activating the space, and that's really special and important. And there is always this constant battle with institutions inquiring about what it is that is going to be lost when we become accessible institutions. What are we giving up? And I think we're finding out that whatever we're giving up was should have been given up a long time ago. We'll move on now to Imo to answer this question. How has the public responded to your institution and its reimagining of how you convey your message?
I guess with us, it's also an uphill battle. When we think about Centro, our biggest is our community. Like we are literally held accountable by our community members. We are more pay attention to more to our community concerns than anything else, because we are being seen very, very closely by many community members, and everybody has had a history with Centro. And there's a lot of still a lot of repair relationships that need to happen. For those that know the history of the Centro, there's been also a boycott that happened from community members. So I think it's also been an uphill process of repair. And I think us or this generation, I've been at the Centro for the last, been part of the Centro in many facets and in out for the last 18 years. But I've been around all this, you could say, turmoil of just the different emotions and feelings from different community members. And I guess when I come with this approach and also making the space very transparent. And that's why I think we hold these community meetings on the first Wednesday, and we have open board meetings. And we want people to come and engage. And we want to be able to really document. We've been very active in documenting everything that we do, the decisions that are being made, because we have nothing to hide within the decisions that we do. We know that this is a community space, and we know that we want to, that we also want to be reliable and be held accountable by community members. And the doors are always open if there's anything to be said. So I say that because we have acquired a lot new volunteers, a lot more youth coming into the space. Right now, there's also been a few classes being taught at Centro, and I think we're also encouraging other Chicano studies professors to come and teach their classes in space. So we have a lot of college students, a lot of high school students who are wanting to reconnect to their roots, but at the same time, they also want to be able to give back to the space. So you can see by the different programming, the more programming we have, it means that there's more community involvement within the Centro, because it's the community themselves volunteering their own time to make this happen for the community. So I think in that respect, there is more good response, but we also are cautious of everything and always listening to all the different concerns that are brought up by community members. And I think that during COVID, it really gave the push for the board. Right now, we have a whole new board. And I just want to mention their names because I want to acknowledge them. But we have Jay Sotomayor, Norel Martinez, Amelia Enrique, Roberto Hernandez, Ageria Ramirez, Teresa Ortega, Mario Aguilar. So these are all current new members that have really brought a lot of richness to the Centro and wanting to really focus on the infrastructure of the Centro. So we want to be able to, a lot of them are also activists, they're also cultural workers, and they're also professors. Many of them have a lot of experience in writing grants. So I think this next focus for us and during COVID has been we need to focus on the infrastructure of the space, being able to have an archive space for our own stories, for our own historia, be able to focus on different things that we can create within Centro and really apply that within the space. So I think we're really excited for this new wave coming at Centro and this new activity, having community programming by community members, but also having board members that are very invested and be able to focus on the infrastructure and be able to have the renovations that the space needs. Be able to renovate a lot of things that have not been renovated for years. And I think that's something that we're focused, and we've been slowly getting to it. And starting already running different grants, and we're really hopeful to be able to continue to have these continued collaborations with different museums and also institutions. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And we'll move on to Brandy to tell us a little bit about how the public has responded to the Museum of Us and its reimagining of how to convey your message.
Yeah, so I'm gonna be real honest with y'all. For some people who have profited and been privileged by white supremacy and colonialism, change is hard. And so sometimes, many times, we also experience that change because they're very vocal. But we've also been overwhelmed and flooded and embraced with an amount of love about our changes from so many communities that in previous SWOT analysis prior to these changes being implemented, one of the threats was these changes, right? And then us launching these changes, they're like, the community would never come. The community is actually coming more often and more frequently. And it's the community that we say we serve, right? It's all of us, not just some of us of the amounts of privilege. We changed our name. I don't know. I don't watch Fox News. It's cool if you do. It's your decision. But Carlson Tucker featured us and it blew up. And so that was quite an interesting situation for our marketing team to have this flood of hate and flood of love at the same time because people were very angry about the name change and how it made them feel. Even if it wasn't directly connected to them, it was linked into these political spaces. And so really we listened, held that, but stuck to what we do and what our name change and why our name change was so important and a direct reflection of all of these changes. The name is important because of the reflection of the binary, the ways in which it held up colonial legacy, all of these spaces. But in the amount of change that we have implemented, that was one aspect from our policies and human resources, our repatriation policies that says we're going to repatriate everything back if the community who wants it back. From our curation practices, that is one aspect of the larger paradigm shift. And so that has been really interesting too, because what we've also seen is that one of the concerns that people were feeling internally at the time, ages ago, was that we'll never get funding for this. Y'all, we get funding for this. There is money out there to fund this work. The community wants this. The community is driving this. The community is the funders, right? And so what does that look like? And I think that that's really important as well, is not having this colonial construct of like fear we can't change to just freeze us and then never do it because we're afraid that folks won't hear us and won't be us and won't see us. People have always seen us and have always been telling us that we're not a direct reflection of our community. And I think that that is something that I see common within the field. One of the things that we've also changed when our name changed, we also changed our membership and our admission practices. And now we do a membership on us. And so that was a part of our decolonizing practices where if you buy an admission ticket to the museum, you get membership for the entire year. And that is shifted access, where membership is no longer this transactional piece to where we want money and then adds to revenue building. And then now you're the special elite accessible folks and the haves and the have-nots, but you're a member of the museum just by entering for that entire year. And I think that that's also really special because it's weird. It's a action of reciprocity, which is a decolonial practice. One of the things that we've also set in a space where we looked at how can we also continue this act of reciprocity. And so we're giving membership to students that come into the door. So students are now members of the museum when they're coming in through some of our access scholarships. School in the Park students are memberships of members, and they get a +1. So anyone they come with, be it another Sprout, be it a guardian, be it a friend, also gets for free within the year that they've been here. It's pretty special when you see a young person who's like a teenager who's never been a museum member and they're like, what? I've never been a museum member till I started working in museums, and it's just fantastic. It's just one of the highlights that I have here recently. The other thing we did when we looked at admission, we looked at like what does change look like, both in policy and practice and admission, is we shifted and we recognize Indigenous peoples. We've always said Indigenous people can get in for free, but we've never actually said it to people. And so now that we're actually transparent, because people need to know in order to access that free space, we've just recently had groups coming in from all over the country. We had an Indigenous group coming in from Nebraska because they saw on our website that they could get in for free. And they were able to not only come into the museum and see the tower, but also visit their cultural resources, because our access policies also shift. So if they are from the community, they should visit their relatives that we are caring for, their relatives as in the objects that we're caring for, within our cultural resources. And so they spent the whole day at the museum, and it was just fantastic. And I also got to be taking selfies with them in their own very special ways. So I think when I think about it, there's these moments where we're having to deal with trolls. The change is hard, but there's also these spaces where that's a flash in the pan. I used to work for a history museum ages ago. It's just these moments. When we're talking about transformative change, we really need to look at the bigger picture, the macro, because the micro is what builds the macro. So we just got to keep pushing through those fears, because what is our ultimate goal? At least that's the kind of the space that we sit in within the Museum of Us.
That was perfect. Thank you so much for that, Brandy.
I'm sorry, Letitia, can I cut in? Sorry. Obviously, I wish this would go on for like 3 hours. We only have about 12 minutes left. So since we have a lot of students in the room, can we skip to the last question and just get some thoughts on how would a student become who you are, do what you do, that sort of thing? Thanks.
Thank you, Michael. That is actually one of the greatest questions here. So yes, we will skip to that. The question is, what recommendations do you have for students at Mesa or in the San Diego Community College District who are interested in the kinds of jobs that you perform? How did you become involved in your career, and how might they engage in similar futures? We'll start with you, Christina.
Can you hear me? I just clicked the wrong thing right now. I've been working in the nonprofit field for a very long time. I didn't study arts or art history. I wanted to be a teacher, went to school to be a teacher. And when I found that it personally wasn't a good fit for me with the rules of the district and all of that, I stayed with nonprofits, and I did a lot of community work and fundraising. And a lot of my training came through mentorship through corporate YMCA. So I did a lot of community work there, but I still maintained my studies. I never saw myself as a museum employee. I was just working very hard to make sure that underrepresented communities, I worked specifically in Southeast San Diego. Southeast San Diego had a safe place to conduct programming, and I worked to fundraise. And I want to share with college students that museum jobs include experience in development, in marketing, facilities, security, community, like myself, and so many more. You don't necessarily need an arts degree to be in an art museum, just speaking on behalf of my experience. And I've succeeded thanks to mentors, having amazing mentors guide me, and listening to their stories and learning through their experiences as I'm working with the community and as I'm going to school. So for myself, nonprofit field, still going to school, having the mentors, and then just being my authentic self also in the museum field. You can't work anywhere without being yourself. So you don't need an arts degree, but you do need to have an understanding and a passion for the community, what's truly needed, not just some, the words that are needed that people want to hear. You want to make sure that you're being intentional with the work that you're doing, because you're being a representation, not just of yourself, but also of the institutions. So that's my short answer.
That was excellent. Thank you, Christina. We'll move on to Imot.
Yeah, I also agree with Christina. For all those listening today, I guess I came to Central as an activist. I came and I helped was helping part of a committee called Neo Zapatista, organizing cultural events. And for those that don't know, it's a politically and socially political events that happen for the whole month of January. We've been doing this for 18 years, and I'm one of the curators that does the exhibit for that. I don't have an arts degree. I feel a cultural worker being at the Central. I have a lot of nonprofit experience, and coming to the space, I feel really invested in being creating spaces for young activists and artists to be able to come and experiment, to be able to dive into whatever their passions desire to create, and to be able to form whatever it is that they want to do. So I really invite all the young people listening today to be able to come to the space If you have a proposal or project, come and be able to make that happen. We hope that in the next two to 5 years, we're able to hire people within Centro, that we are in a position that we're finally able to hire young people and people that really want to invest within this community space and understands and relates to the history of the space. Hope that this happens, and just appreciate and thank everybody for the space and for this conversation. Gracias. Gracias.
Thank you for that. We'll move on to Brandy.
So I think there's like the standard answer of internships and all of, but that's really like these points of accessibility, because who can afford to take an unpaid internship, and who can afford sometimes to take something, a position that is not going to be able to help you pay your rent. And so I think my feedback and suggestions, someone also asked in terms of where we can look for different places in the things. And so I typed in a couple of websites that y'all can look, and you can like isolate them down to California. But I think my suggestion is don't pigeonhole yourself into one type of museum, one type of job. Even don't even pigeonhole yourself into like a museum. I started the field because I needed to pay rent and feed my dog ages ago, and not because I wanted to work in the museums. And I'm ended up becoming passionate about changing museums. But I think about, I've also left museums because I've gotten frustrated, or because I needed money, or there's a lot of different variables. And what I've noticed when I left museums was that there are so many transferable skills that actually made me a better museum professional by working at a nonprofit, or by working at a social justice bike organization doing public programs. And so I think if you want to do exhibits, what are those key aspects of doing exhibits? How do you understand fabrication? Like, what does that field look like? If you want to do script writing, what does writing scripts look like? What does community invest? So thinking about those transferable skills, and then looking at the broader field, because that, in like how you're able to then communicate those pieces, are also direct on-ramps into the field of museums, without having to try and figure out like how you're going to take this internship and just take a visitor experience position because you need your foot in the door. That doesn't always work, and doesn't work for everyone, because those are just really privileged, accessible points at many times.
Thank you. And we'll move on to you, Jesse.
I would say stay curious and go investigate for yourself. You know, the reality is everybody's going to find their own path. I teach at an MFA program, yet I only have a BFA, and I went straight into the business. So I just did it. I was an actor for over 20 years, you know, and when this job position came up, I was very transparent in being like, hey, I'm a professional. I didn't stay in academia and get an MFA. I actually went and did it. I got the tools and kind of went into it. Yeah. And so it becomes that thing. And I don't know if that's going to happen for everybody, but I do know that working at an MFA program, I'm looking for a debt-free MFA program, because then that's accessibility. That's when everybody can come to your program, so you get the top. You know what I'm saying? The playing field becomes even. So let me do my job on making that happen, and then we can have a conversation about MFAs. Because if there's a free MFA, then let's go there. I would have gone there, you know, and it's a 2-year program. And then housing in San Diego is an even bigger situation. But what we do have at the MFA program right now is tuition free. So we start there. Yeah. And what starts happening is we get people from different economic levels and backgrounds. And it just becomes exciting, because then if you're curious and you go investigate and you find our program, you can actually come here, you know. And I'm hoping that within 2 to 3 years, it does become debt free and housing is free. And then you can just come here and concentrate on your work and not worry about chasing a loan for the rest of your life, you know, honestly, because these programs are expensive. So go investigate. They're out there.
Thank you for that. And I'll chime in real quick in the little bit of time that we have left. I love my job. I love being invited to tables filled with art conservation field professionals. And I love starting out my talks with, I am not an art conservator, and I joined this field not knowing anything about art conservation. I'm really proud of that because I come from a background, I worked for 10 years in a social service agency, I worked in nonprofits, I worked for the city in fundraising and development, leading the funding program for the Commission for Arts and Culture. And when I was approached about taking my job as the executive director of the only nonprofit art conservation center in the entire Western region, I said, I don't know anything about conservation. And they said, great, because we don't need a conservator, we need a leader. And my background as an activist and an advocate, and my background with community engagement and actually working with the public and working with people made me an ideal candidate for this position. And I'd like to think that I'm doing pretty good at it a year and 3 months in, and really proving that the leaders that are shifting the way, and Brenda, you talked a lot about this inside change that is happening has to happen in both policy and practice. And the leaders, us that we are in these institutions right now, are pushing for the HR policy changes that will make it accessible for folks from non-traditional backgrounds to get into these positions and continue pushing these shifts forward. So I love being able to say that I'm a Chicana who majored in Chicana studies and is now the executive director of an art conservation nonprofit. Because it really is a testament to everything that we acquire in working in our non-traditional spaces and working with community and really exemplifying the importance of labor and passion and community work beyond financial resources and the magic that we can do with them. And also just FYI, for those interested in joining the field of conservation, BACC is engaging in education programs. We're actually doing kind of demystifying art conservation with Mesa's museum studies program, where the class will be coming in every semester to visit the labs and shadow our conservators and really kind of be introduced to conservation and preservation as a field of study, so that we have more folks from Southern California and our geographic area and our cultural communities represented in the conservation field, which we currently do not. So just kind of trying to expand in every possible way opportunities for folks like myself from non-traditional backgrounds to get in here and infiltrate.
Hey, all right. Thank you very much, everyone. We only have 1 minute left, and I know that's not enough for questions. If the panelists are okay with it, if someone has a question and they send it to me, is it okay if I send it along to you after the meeting? Yes, and please check the chats. There are a few last minute messages there, but I wanted to take the opportunity to thank our entire panel and thank everyone for attending. And that's all I have. So I appreciate it. Virtual hand claps for everyone, and we appreciate it so much. Thank you.